Well, joining me now for her response to that and to the opposition's motion is the Heritage Minister, Mélanie Joly. I'm very glad you were able to make it.
Very happy to be here.
Obviously, everyone's going to be shocked by these contemptible threats read out by Ms. Khalid. But my question to you in this context is whether that counts as Islamophobia. It's plainly anti-Muslim hate speech. It's uttering threats under the criminal code, if you like. Is it Islamophobia?
Well, Islamophobia is discrimination against Muslim people. And we know what is homophobia, we know what is misogyny, and we don't contest these definitions. So the thing is right now, the problem with the conservatives is they're fearful of identifying Islamophobia. And this, their own motion is a cynical attempt to find an answer to their own internal division. Mrs. Khalid came with this motion in December and decided in reaction to a petition that another member, Frank Bellis, did, condemning Islamophobia. 70,000 people signed the petition. Now, she came as a MP, decided to take that important issue up front and condemn Islamophobia and all systemic racism. And she is now putting forward her motion. We are supporting it. What's the impact? It's to study Islamophobia and systemic racism and to ask the Heritage Committee to find recommendations based on that study.
I take your point about the study and so forth and the balance of the motion, but let me take issue first with your definition. You started out by defining Islamophobia as fear of Muslims. It's not Muslimophobia. It's not phobia about people, Muslims, or a group of people. It's Islamophobia, which is a religion. Islam is not a race, it's not a people, it's a religion.
I said discrimination, I didn't say fear. I said discrimination against people of Muslim faith.
Okay, phobia is fear.
And so basically what we know is that there is an issue right now in terms of the Muslim community being targeted. While hatred crimes have diminished across the country since 2012, they have increased, they actually have doubled against the Muslim community. That's a fact. We know what happened at the Quebec City mosque attack. People were killed because they were in a mosque and they were praying there. We know there's been vandalism of mosques in Quebec, in Montreal, in Sept-Îles, in Ottawa, in Toronto, in Peterborough, in Hamilton, in Alberta. We know that. This is a phenomenon that is happening. Now, it's not because we're not talking about it that we'll find a solution. The idea, as parliamentarians and as a government, is to find solutions when problems occur. And this is exactly what this motion seeks.
The House, as I understand it, as far as we can tell, is unanimous in agreement with what you just said, that these attacks are terrible and should be condemned.
And therefore, so what's next?
The argument is not about whether that's all true. The argument is about the inclusion of the word Islamophobia, which for some people means literally what it says, fear of Islam, which is a religion, which is subject to reasonable criticism. Someone may say that I object strongly to Islamic ideas like the death to apostates, death to the infidels, death to gays. They may object to those things, and those are reasonable objections, and that's fear of Islam. But it's not discrimination against Muslims. Do you appreciate do you agree that there is a distinction?
But the idea is right now we know that the Muslim community is being targeted. This is a fact. I just gave you the data. And what we want to do is to find solutions. But so the problem with the conservatives right now is that they're scared of using the term. And so it doesn't mean because you're not using the term that actually it doesn't exist. And basically by not using the term, you're contributing to the problem. And so these are difficult conversations. These are difficult conversations that we know we must have.
But you have the power to make that conversation much, much easier with a very simple step suggested by a very distinguished liberal, Owen Kotler, who, as I mentioned to Mr. Anderson, as you saw, makes the proposal, well, why don't you just say anti-Muslim bigotry? Then we know we're talking about people, not ideas.
Well, I had the
Why don't we do that?
I had the chance to talk with Mr. Cutler, and since he has been able to see the entire debate on this, thought that it was quite a cynical attempt to find resolve within the Conservative Party on the issue regarding the Muslim community. So he agrees with our position. Now, the most important problem we
no, he
see...
doesn't. He's made a statement publicly, and he says that you could fix the problem between yourselves and the Conservatives, or some of the Conservatives, by substituting the words anti-Muslim hatred or anti-Muslim bigotry for Islamophobia. Then you don't have a problem.
Well, the reality is that we need to make sure that this motion goes ahead, because we know that there is a community that is being targeted. Terry, this is more than words. It's actually, this is
so
extremely...
we won't have a problem with words if you do what
the
Mr.
idea
Cutler
is that Mrs. Khalid, when she came up with this motion, really thought this would be getting unanimous consent. But meanwhile, what's happening within the Conservative Party is that there's some leadership candidates that have been doing fundraising based on the fact of not condemning Islamophobia, have been also rallying support because of it. So this is an issue. And this is why it's so important that as politicians, we stand united behind what Mrs. Khalid did, which was a good intentioned, well-drafted motion condemning Islamophobia and all systemic racism. And I must say, I had the chance as minister in charge of inclusion and diversity to meet people across the country, people from different communities, people from communities that are minority communities and that are also discriminated,
so let me ask you this.
and that are also feeling a form of racism or prejudice. And people all agree that Islamophobia is a fact, is happening, and ultimately solutions must be found.
So you define as racism somebody who objects, however strongly, to Islamic ideas like the ones I described, death to infidels. Is that Islamophobic? Is that anti-Muslim? Is it racism? What is it? Is it racism?
The idea is really not to condemn any form of free speech. Of course, we're in favor of free speech, but the emotion is not about amending the criminal code, or this is not actually only about Islamophobia. It's larger. It's Islamophobia and systemic racism. But ultimately, the important thing here we must remember is that this is a social issue that is happening in our country.
I think
and we shouldn't be fearful of using the words, and the use of Islamophobia ultimately is the fact of making discrimination against Muslim people. And I must say also, since I've presented the government response on this, I've been myself receiving lots of emails and trolls of people that have been presenting such outrageous comments, such as the ones that were presented by
Let's hope there's an end to those ugly comments. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
Mélanie Joly, the Minister of Heritage, appreciate your coming in.